You are listening to HOA Boardroom Battles. This is an exciting HOA story. Laura Carter is standing in my driveway with a clipboard, a phone camera pointed at my house, and an envelope that says Vista Verde Owners Association in the return address corner. She tells me I owe $375 in quarterly dues, $200 in late fees, and I have 48 hours to submit an application for my fence or the board will file a lien. I tell her I am not in the HOA. She says every property on Magnolia Crest Drive is covered under the Vista Verde covenant. I pull out my phone and show her the recorded deed. She does not even look at it. She says it is not personal, it is policy, and if I do not comply by Friday, she will forward my account to collections. I moved to this house 6 months ago because I wanted to stop renting and build equity. I work in IT support, and after years of throwing money into apartments, I finally saved enough for a down payment. The neighborhood is a suburban edge neighborhood where one street is inside the HOA and one is not. My house is on the outside street. The confusion comes from a shared entrance and the fact that the original developer platted 2 phases, but only phase 1 ever joined Vista Verde Owners Association. My parcel is in phase 2, which was sold off to a different builder and never recorded under the HOA. Laura Carter is the architectural review chair, and she has decided that the entrance sign gives her authority over everyone who drives past it. The first notice arrived 2 weeks after I closed on the house. It was taped to my front door in a plastic sleeve. It said my fence did not have architectural approval, and I needed to submit drawings and paint samples within 10 business days. I called the number on the letter and reached a property manager named Steve. He sounded uncomfortable. He said Laura had been pushing to expand enforcement to the adjacent street for months, and the board kept telling her no, but she was mailing letters anyway. He told me I could ignore it, but he warned me she does not give up easy. I ignored it. That was my first mistake. A week later, I got a second letter, this time certified mail. It said I was in violation of Section 4.3 of the Vista Verde Architectural Guidelines, and I owed a $50 processing fee plus $25 per day until I submitted the application. I wrote back with a copy of my deed, and the legal description showing my lot was outside the plat boundary. I mailed it certified. I got no response. Then the portal post went live. Laura runs the neighborhood Facebook alternative, a private web portal called Vista Verde Connect. One morning I woke up to 17 text messages from neighbors I barely know. Someone had posted my street address under a thread titled Compliance Update, along with a photo of my house and a note that said this owner has refused multiple requests to comply with fence approval requirements, and the board is proceeding with enforcement. My phone rang 6 times before 9 in the morning. 3 people asked if I was selling. 2 asked if I had hired a lawyer. 1 said she always thought my fence looked cheap. I called Steve again. He sighed and said Laura had no authority to post that, and he would ask her to take it down, but the board meets once a month and they were not scheduled until the 15th. He said the safest thing I could do was show up to a meeting with my paperwork and make them vote on it in public. I said I should not have to defend a boundary that is already recorded. He said I was right, but he also said Laura has been on the board for 6 years and nobody wants to cross her because she controls the architectural committee, and half the violation reports in the neighborhood come from her daily driving loops. That afternoon, Laura showed up again. This time she had a tape measure clipped to her belt and a digital camera. She walked the perimeter of my fence, taking photos every few feet. I opened the front door and asked what she was doing. She said she was documenting the encroachment. I said encroachment on what? She said the HOA easement along the rear property line. I asked her to show me the easement on a map. She said she did not need to, because the covenants were recorded in 1997 and they cover all parcels accessed via the main entrance. I told her my parcel was deeded separately and never signed into Vista Verde. She said compliance is easy when you are not trying to cheat. I spent that evening digging through county records online. I found the original plat for Phase 1, filed in 1997, and the plat for Phase 2, filed in 2001. The boundary line between them runs along the back of the entrance road. My house is clearly on the Phase 2 side. I downloaded both PDFs, highlighted the line, and saved them to a folder. I also found the Declaration of Covenants for Vista Verde. It lists every lot in Phase 1 by parcel number. My parcel number is not on the list. I printed everything and put it in a binder. 2 days later, I got an email from an attorney. The subject line said final notice regarding Vista Verde dues and violations. The body of the email said I owed $625 in dues, fees, and penalties, and if I did not pay within 7 days, the association would file a claim of lien against my property. It said I had waived my right to a hearing by failing to respond to previous notices. I forwarded the email to Steve and asked if this was legitimate. He called me 10 minutes later and said the board had not authorized any legal action, and he was forwarding my documents to the HOA attorney to clear it up. He also said Laura had scheduled an emergency architectural hearing for Thursday at 7, and I was invited to attend. I asked him if the hearing was mandatory. He said no, but if I did not show up, Laura would submit her report to the board and they would vote without my input. I said I would be there. Wednesday night, I got a text from a neighbor 2 streets over. She said she saw the portal post and wanted to warn me that Laura had been doing this to people for years. She said 3 owners on the north end paid dues for 2 years before they found out they were never in the HOA, and when they asked for a refund, Laura said the money had already been spent on landscaping and there was nothing the board could do. She said the only reason she stopped was because one of the owners threatened to sue and the insurance company told the board to back off. Thursday morning, I printed a second copy of the plat map and the covenant list. I also printed the recorded deed with the legal description. I highlighted the boundary line in yellow on the plat and circled my parcel number on the deed. I put everything in a folder and drove to the clubhouse at 6:45. The hearing room was a conference room with a long table and 8 chairs. Laura was already there, sitting at the head with a binder 3 inches thick. 2 other board members were present, both older men I had seen at the neighborhood pool. One introduced himself as the treasurer. The other said he was just there to observe. Steve was sitting in the corner with a laptop. He gave me a small nod when I walked in. Laura started the meeting by reading a prepared statement. She said I had installed a fence without architectural approval, ignored multiple violation notices, and refused to pay dues despite living in a property served by Vista Verde amenities. She said the board had a fiduciary duty to enforce the covenants equally, and making exceptions would open the association to liability. She said the fence was not only unapproved, but also violated the height restriction in Section 4.3. She held up a photo of my fence and said she had measured it at 6 feet 2 inches. The covenant allows 6 feet maximum. I waited for her to finish, then I opened my folder. I said I appreciated her time, but my property is not part of Vista Verde Owners Association. I slid the plat map across the table. I pointed to the Phase 1 boundary and the Phase 2 boundary. I showed them my parcel number on the deed. I said the covenant she kept citing does not list my parcel, and the legal description on my deed makes no reference to any HOA. The treasurer leaned forward and looked at the map. He said he had never seen this before. Laura said the map was irrelevant because the entrance is shared, and the covenants apply to all properties using Vista Verde infrastructure. I asked her to show me where that is written. She flipped through her binder and did not answer. Steve cleared his throat and said he had forwarded my documents to the HOA attorney that morning. He said the attorney had reviewed the plat and confirmed that my parcel was never part of the original declaration. He said the attorney recommended the board drop all enforcement and remove my address from the portal. Laura said the attorney was not a board member and did not get a vote. The treasurer said the attorney was hired to protect the association from liability, and ignoring his advice was reckless. The observer said he agreed. Laura stood up and said this was exactly the kind of weak leadership that let people take advantage of the community. She said if we let one person ignore the rules, then everyone would start ignoring the rules, and property values would collapse. She said it is not personal, it is policy. I said the policy does not apply to me because I am not in the HOA. She said I was splitting hairs. The treasurer said he wanted to table the vote until the full board could meet and review the attorney opinion. Laura said there was nothing to review. I said I had one document that makes their lawyer go quiet, and I was happy to email it to everyone right now. I opened my phone, pulled up the scanned deed and the plat report, and sent it to the full board distribution list and copied the attorney. I got an auto reply from the attorney within 30 seconds. 10 seconds later, I got a reply from the attorney with one sentence: "This owner is correct. The parcel is not covered." Laura's face went red. She closed her binder and said the meeting was over. The treasurer said he was calling an emergency board session for Saturday, and he expected everyone to attend. Laura walked out without another word. Friday morning, the portal post was gone. By Friday afternoon, 3 neighbors had texted me to apologize for believing the original post. One said she had no idea the boundary worked that way. Another said Laura had told her I was a problem tenant, and she was sorry for assuming it was true. Saturday, I showed up to the emergency board meeting. This time, there were 6 board members present, plus Steve and the attorney on a video call. The attorney walked everyone through the plat maps, the legal description, and the covenant language. He said there was no ambiguity. He said my property had never been part of Vista Verde, and any attempt to collect dues or enforce architectural rules would expose the board to a claim for harassment and abusive process. He said if I wanted to, I could demand a retraction and an apology, and the board should comply immediately to limit damages. Laura tried to argue that the entrance gave the HOA an implied easement. The attorney said there is no such thing as an implied HOA membership, and the entrance is a public right-of-way maintained by the county. He said the only reason Vista Verde pays for the landscaping around the sign is because they volunteered to, not because they have any legal control over it. Laura said the community had a right to enforce standards. The attorney said the community has exactly the rights defined in the recorded covenant and nothing more. The board voted 5-1 to rescind all violation notices, remove my name from any collections list, and post a correction on the portal. Laura was the only no vote. The treasurer said he was also opening a review of all enforcement actions Laura had initiated in the past 3 years to make sure no one else had been incorrectly billed. Laura said that was a waste of time. The observer said if we had been charging people illegally, then the association could be liable for fraud. Laura said compliance is easy when you are not trying to cheat. Nobody responded. The correction went live on the portal Sunday night. It said the board had reviewed the property records and determined that several addresses on the east side of the entrance were not part of the HOA, and any previous enforcement notices sent to those addresses were issued in error. It did not name Laura, but everyone knew. My phone lit up with congratulations texts. 2 people said they were also on the east side and they had been paying dues for years. They wanted to know how to get a refund. Monday morning, Laura showed up at my driveway one last time. She did not have a clipboard or a camera. She just stood at the end of the driveway and stared at my house for a solid minute. I watched her from the window. She got back in her car and drove away. I have not seen her since. If you appreciate stories about standing up for your rights, hit the like button and subscribe for more neighborhood drama. Steve called me 2 weeks later and said the board had completed the enforcement review. He said they found 9 properties that had been incorrectly billed, and the total amount collected was over $4,000. He said the board voted to issue refunds and to remove Laura from the architectural committee. He said she resigned from the board entirely the next day. He also said the new committee chair wanted to make sure I knew I was welcome to use the pool in the clubhouse, even though I was not a member, because the facilities are open to the public on weekends and they want to be good neighbors. I thanked him and said I appreciated the gesture, but I was going to keep my distance. He laughed and said he understood completely. The whole situation taught me 2 things. First, always read your deed and know your boundaries. Second, people who say it is not personal, it is policy, are usually the ones making it personal. Laura spent 6 years building a little empire based on selective enforcement and intimidation, and the second someone called her bluff with actual paperwork, the whole thing collapsed. I kept the binder with the plat maps and the deed on my desk for a month, just in case she tried anything else. She never did. The portal stayed quiet. The neighborhood went back to complaining about trash pickup schedules and unleashed dogs. 3 months later, I was mowing the lawn when a car pulled up and a woman in a business suit stepped out. She introduced herself as a real estate attorney and said she was representing one of the families that got a refund. She said they were considering a lawsuit against the association for fraud and emotional distress, and they wanted to know if I would be willing to provide a witness statement about Laura's tactics. I said I would think about it. I never followed up. I did not want to spend the next year in depositions. But I heard through Steve that the family settled quietly, and the board implemented new rules requiring the attorney to pre-approve any enforcement action before a notice gets mailed. Laura moved out of the neighborhood 6 months later. Someone told me she bought a condo in a high-rise with no HOA. I hope she is happy there. The fence is still up. I never painted it, never submitted an application, never paid $1. Every time I pull into the driveway, I see the entrance sign for Vista Verde, and I remember that just because something looks official does not mean it has authority over you. I also learned that the people who enforce the rules the loudest are often the ones who understand them the least. Laura spent years convincing herself and everyone else that the entrance sign gave her jurisdiction over the entire neighborhood. She printed violation notices, scheduled hearings, hired attorneys, and filed liens, all without ever checking whether the properties she was targeting were actually part of the HOA. And when someone finally showed her a map, she doubled down instead of admitting the mistake. The board is different now. The new architectural chair is a retired engineer who actually reads the plat maps before approving anything. The treasurer implemented a policy that every enforcement notice has to include the specific covenant section, the parcel number, and a reference to the recorded declaration. Steve told me complaints dropped by 60% in the first quarter. I still see some of the old guard at neighborhood events. They nod politely and keep their distance. I think they are embarrassed. A few have apologized in awkward sidewalk conversations. I tell them it is fine, and I mean it. I do not hold grudges. But I also do not forget. My wife asks me sometimes if I regret buying the house. I tell her no. The location is good, the neighborhood is quiet, and the house has everything we need. The HOA drama was stressful, but it was also a lesson in how to stand your ground when someone tries to bully you with fake authority. And in the end, I won without spending $1 on legal fees, because the facts were on my side and I had the paperwork to prove it. The property manager job turned over last year. Steve retired, and the board hired a management company. The new company sent me a welcome packet in the mail with a letter explaining that my property is not part of Vista Verde Owners Association, and I have no obligation to pay dues or follow architectural guidelines. I thought that was a nice touch. It showed they learned something. I framed the plat map and hung it in my home office. It is a reminder that boundaries matter, and knowing where you stand is half the battle. Every time I look at it, I think about Laura standing at the end of my driveway with her clipboard and her tape measure, convinced that she had the authority to control my property. And I think about the moment the attorney sent that one-sentence email, and the look on her face when she realized she had been bluffing with no hand. People ask me for advice now. Neighbors on the edge streets, people who get surprise letters from HOAs they never joined, buyers who are nervous about covenant confusion. I tell them all the same thing. Get a survey, read your deed, and know your parcel number. If someone tries to claim authority over your property, make them show you the recorded document that gives them that authority. If they cannot, then they have nothing. The final board meeting I attended was in December, almost a year after the whole thing started. The treasurer gave a year-end report and mentioned that enforcement was down, member satisfaction was up, and legal expenses had dropped by 70%. He did not mention Laura by name, but he did say the board had implemented new training for committee chairs and updated the violation notice template to include mandatory legal review. He thanked me for bringing the boundary issue to their attention and said it had prompted a full audit that corrected a lot of long-standing errors. I shook his hand and left. I have not been back to a board meeting since. I do not need to. My property is mine, my boundaries are clear, and no one is knocking on my door with a clipboard anymore. The neighborhood entrance still has the Vista Verde sign. It still looks official with the landscaping and the decorative lights. But now when I drive past it, I do not feel any anxiety. I know exactly where the boundary is, and I know I am on the right side of it. That is the story of how the Vista Verde Owners Association tried to force me into an HOA I was never part of, and how a simple plat map and a recorded deed shut down 6 years of selective enforcement. Laura Carter lost her position, the board lost thousands in refunds, and I kept my house exactly the way it was. Sometimes the system works, as long as you know how to work the system. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.